Hello, and welcome to this SEPA discussion on Chinese-Russian relations. I'm Edward Lucas, non-resident fellow at SEPA, and I'm joined by Bobo Lo, who is the co-author of our report, Partnership Without Substance, which looks at Chinese-Russian relations, cooperation and competition in Eastern Europe. Before we start, I have an important message. This video was funded by the Russia Strategic Initiative, US European Command in Stuttgart, Germany. Opinions, arguments, viewpoints, and conclusions expressed in this report do not represent those of RSI, US EUCOM, the Department of Defense, or the US government. Our report looks at the new arrival of China in the region that we still sometimes call Eastern Europe, and its effect on the countries there, success in terms of what Beijing wants, and also any potential friction with Russia, which has to some extent regarded Eastern Europe a bit as its own backyard. Bobo, when you were researching this report, what was the thing that most surprised you, the thing that was your biggest takeaway?
Edward, I don't know whether it's so much a matter of being surprised, but I think the most striking thing was how little China and Russia have to do with each other in Central and Eastern Europe. There's a lot of talk in the West about a Sino-Russian partnership determined to overturn the liberal rules-based order. But there is absolutely no evidence of that in Central and Eastern Europe. And what is so striking, really, is just that they have just about zero to do with each other. It's not even that the cooperation is not particularly well developed. There is nothing. What surprised you about it?
I think one thing that surprised me was going through the Chinese language material, thanks to our amazing teams of researchers, and comparing that with the Russian material, and finding out that this was something of a sort of strategic nothing burger. I was particularly impressed by a very caustic analysis in a semi-official Chinese paper by someone who works at a Chinese university, who was criticizing Russia for not understanding its imperial heritage and the kind of strategic and historical baggage that brings in the region. So that was one big thing. I think the other thing that really struck me was going into deep on the Hungary, Serbia, and to some extent Greece and Belarus, looking at which are the countries that are often said to be the ones that play a China card, and seeing how little of substance there really was there. There's a railway which talked about, there's some smokestack investments, there's an industrial park, but compared with the sort of headlines that one's read about how much headway China's making in these countries, it was a bit like the Wizard of Oz, really. You pull the curtain back and there's this sort of funny old man playing the organ, and I guess that was your impression too.
Well, very much so. I mean, it was fascinating to me, the disparity between Western perceptions of China's involvement in Central and Eastern Europe, which really, as you say, really bigs it up. Whereas the actual level of Chinese interest, much less involvement in Central and Eastern Europe is really very slight indeed. And I think there's a general problem here. In the West, we tend to look at China as this unstoppable, monolithic juggernaut, whereas in fact, China's approach to the region and to much of its foreign policy is hardly smooth or efficient, but is often cack-handed.
I suppose one of the things that I was quite struck by was the lack of Russian nerves about this, that even if China's not very effective, there is a sort of performative pro-China sentiment, which you see, and to some extent that is a sort of competition with Russia. So the Serbian leadership, for example, has got some issues with the Russians at the moment and has been very sort of demonstratively saying how, thank you, brother Xi, posters going up for Chinese help and the vaccine and so on. And Russia seems sort of intensely relaxed about this. To some extent, it's cooperating in building a bit of the Budapest to Belgrade railway. And I'm wondering whether that's because Russia realized that it's also pretty much on the margins in most of the region as well, because they've chosen to the west. So it's like two bald men fighting over a comb, or whether they reckon that their advantages are based on proximity, energy, deep Soviet era ties, which aren't really affected by whether Orban goes to Beijing and issues a couple of press releases.
Exactly. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because proximity gives Russia a huge strategic advantage over China when it comes to engaging with Central and Eastern Europe. I also think that Russians are well aware about levels of anxiety in Europe and in the region, particularly about the extent of Chinese influence. And I think also Moscow is confident that the Chinese value their relationship with Russia. In other words, it's not worth jeopardizing the Sino-Russian partnership for the sake of what are fairly low-level projects in Central and Eastern Europe.
Yes, I think you used the phrase strategic backwater at one point in the. But what is the Sino-Russian partnership then? I mean, if the activity, one can't even call it a relationship, in Central and Eastern Europe is a sort of nothing burger. This is really just pure hard-headed power politics, is it, or is there something?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. I mean, we tend to think in the West that China and Russia have come together because there is a certain authoritarian like-mindedness. Now, that is true to an extent, but fundamentally, this is a traditional great power relationship. In other words, it's based on the pursuit of naked self-interest. Both sides have a relationship with each other, value their relationship with each other, because they see it as bringing significant strategic, political, economic, technological dividends. So it's good to get on with each other, and it's very, very bad if things go pear-shaped.
And of course, one example of that is they haven't even come to any friction in Central Asia, where one would think that it might be a bit more of a zero-sum game.
I think, though, just quickly on that, I think that Central Asia could be a matter of time. Sort of, I think this is an area where we should certainly keep watching.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in the Tajik nerves
Yes.
about Chinese territorial claims, but
indeed.
we have to, maybe we can come back to that in future. But I suppose the other question is, what should the West's response be? And we've seen this Western sanctions on China, belated, some might say, prompting a very demonstrative love-in between Wang Yi and Sergei Lavrov, the two countries' foreign ministers, and talk of intensifying cooperation. But when you look at the situation in Central and Eastern Europe, what to you is the lesson for Western policymakers? What should we be doing, either in more of things or less of things?
I think the most important thing is that in relation to the Sino-Russian partnership is we should be fairly relaxed. We should understand that it's not the Sino-Russian partnership that threatens Western interests in Central and Eastern Europe. Some Chinese activities are of concern, some Russian activities of concern, and we need to respond to specific threats and challenges. One of the things that bothers me as an observer of the Sino-Russian partnership and of their respective foreign policies is that we get distracted by abstractions and cliches such as authoritarian model of governance, debt trap diplomacy, and claiming that China and Russia want to attack the free world, undermine the free world. I think we need to get away from that and concentrate on specific threats and challenges. I also think that we need to disabuse ourselves of the illusion that somehow being softer towards Putin, being nicer to him, will somehow entice him away from Beijing. I think that radically overestimates our influence and just as seriously underestimates the value of the Sino-Russian partnership for both sides. We need to stop being naive, in other words.
Yes, I sometimes think people need to remember this is not a board game and it's not the plot of a thriller.
Exactly.
And it's not one of those sort of board games like Risk or Diplomacy where you can sort of make and break alliances very, very quickly. And it's not like a thriller where everything has a sort of neat hangs together with a neat denouement. This is messy, self-interested stuff. And the other thing which we might just finish on because we're almost out of time is that all this succeeds really not because Russia and China are good at what they do, but because we're bad at what we do. So
exactly.
if we were better at building infrastructure and improving connectivity in Central and Eastern Europe, there wouldn't be any need for people to start to go to the 17+1 beauty contest, which we've hardly touched on, but is now falling apart. Yeah. And again, if we had a more compelling story on public health and vaccines, then people wouldn't be so interested in the Chinese and Russian offering there. So final 15 seconds to you, Bobo, if you could put this report on President Biden's desk, what would you say?
We need to be better at what we do rather than worry what the Chinese and Russians are doing. Because if we do what we're good at, then we will outperform them.
Well, thanks very much indeed for that marvelously pithy rallying call at the end, Bobo. It's been a pleasure working with you on this report. And I also want to thank all our colleagues at SIPA who worked so hard on it in both research and logistics. We commend the report to everyone who watches this video, and you can find it on the SIPA website. But from me, Edward Lucas in London, from Bobo Lowe down the road in Brighton, thanks so much. Thanks very much for watching, and please stay in touch with SIPA and check out our website for more reports on Russia, China, and much more besides.
Thank you.